Let's take a look at that story. It is taking up a lot of ink in newspapers across the world, and Solange Prigent is with us to take us through a few of those. Solange, firstly, as a non-American, remind us once again, why are the Iowa caucuses so important?
Well, first and foremost, it is the first one, and that is why it's important. It is the official launching to the primary season in the U.S. And so Democrats look to it as sort of a test of a candidate's might and his or her ability to sway voters. As USA Today tells us, for the paper and the nation, the Iowa caucuses are not your run-of-the-mill primary. Now, this isn't just because it's the first, it's also because traditionally they've winnowed down the playing field. They're getting attention because they use this old school system where you actually stand in a corner of a gym or a hall and you vote physically for your candidate.
And be counted.
Exactly. And there are also coin tosses. The site Daily Dot tells us where if a vote gets too tight, you actually toss a coin. Now, this actually happened this time around, which has enraged some voters because it's relatively random. So all those reasons are why this caucus gets so much attention.
Fascinating. Of course, we are on this occasion still waiting for the results and told they're a good few hours away. That's quite unusual, is it not, Solange? I mean, normally we would now have the results at this time.
Indeed, it is unusual. And the New York Times tells us why we are waiting. The Iowa Democratic Party has said that there were inconsistencies found in the results. The party says that they're doing quality control checks before making the data public. Now, how do you do a quality control check on physical people? Well, there is a paper trail. There is the physical count, but there is also a paper ballot that people use. So the Times tells us they're using that and photos as well of the results, comparing them to make sure everything is right, especially because there is new tech involved. There are some 1,600 precincts, and they have this new system, technology system that puts all that data in. And that tech is coming under a lot of fire. The Times tells us that they are having technical issues with this app, which has led to rumors and confusion online of what's going on. But the Iowa Democratic Party has insisted this is not a hack. They are just dotting their eyes as in Iowa.
I have to say, it all sounds somewhat unnecessarily complicated, Solange, but there are already, I believe, calls in the American papers to ignore the results of Iowa's caucus.
Yeah, and it's not, though, because of the tech issues.
Okay.
It is or the delayed results. It's because of discussion, and there has been a lot of it, about the importance that Democrats and the press give to this vote when there are primaries across the country in the coming months. Now, the Washington Post tries to remind voters of that. The journalist there makes a plea to Democrats to ignore this caucus or these caucuses and not to buy into the narrative, oh, Iowa propulsed Obama, Iowa proposed underdog Carter, therefore it's telling the truth. And the site Vox also has a good few points as to why Iowa shouldn't be given so much importance. Iowa represents less than 1% of the U.S. population. Compared to other states, it is very white and very old. For example, in Iowa, 60% of the population is white, whereas 40% of the Democratic Party is not. And this has given advantage in the past to white frontrunners, as the Los Angeles Times tells us. And they're calling for more states to vote on the same day, at least for the first few primaries. But Vox tells us that the order of the primaries is unlikely to change for legislative reasons. So it comes down to people's choices and whether or not to take stock in these results. And they say that Illinois, for example, could be a more judicious choice that reflects more the voters, who the Democratic voters really are.
Yeah, interesting to put it back into context if you were voting there in the US. Well, meanwhile, one of the favourites going into this poll in Iowa was Bernie Sanders. Many of his supporters feel he does have the momentum to go all the way this time.
Yeah, Time magazine today has an interesting article about his momentum, how it is surprising now for some people, and it was surprising in 2016 when he lost Iowa by just a few votes to Hillary Clinton. Now, it explains how Sanders fans see him ideologically as someone who's uncompromising, that he won't drift to the middle as they fear other candidates will. One of the main contenders against Sanders has been his fellow progressive candidate, Elizabeth Warren. And here The Atlantic has an interesting article that outlines the differences between the two candidates.
Interesting. Now, Mayor Pete is a new face in this presidential campaign, and the New York Times is covering one of his challenges.
Yeah, and it is, which is...
Can be an advantage as well in a way.
It could be. It is his unpronounceable name, which when you think about it is quite heartening. It is not his sexual orientation. Anyway, the Times says that over the past year, Americans haven't been able to say or spell his name right. They did a poll that showed that less than a third of people who actually can recognize him still can't say or pronounce his name. And one person who possibly can is Donald Trump. He often teases Mayor Pete Buttigieg about his name. And the Times concludes that it may be a stretch to go from Mayor Pete to President Pete. But you never know. The Americans elected Barack Hussein Obama, and many said he had an unpronounceable name, and it's now commonplace.
Very true. Solange Jean, thanks a lot for the look at the international papers, or the American papers, really focusing on those caucuses in Iowa.